everybody, and welcome back to another episode of And All Shall Be Well. My name is Megan Rohr, and I am your host. Our podcast is a collection of conversations. Some are new, some are old, and all have a little bit of wisdom that will help you on your journey towards wellness. They are conversations with individuals who are very diverse in hopes that you will find something in their story that helps you live your own story. Wellness here is anything mind, body, spirit care that helps you along your journey to live your purpose, to love yourself, to love your neighbors, and to be a work in progress. This is not a space of judging anyone for what has happened in the past, but for just being cheerleaders for each other and encouraging growth and love and life into the future. Today's guest is a conversation that was so delightful for me to have. It's about poetry. We have Aileen Cassinetto, who uh, was the poet laureate in San Mateo County, and who talks a lot about ways that their personal immigrant journey and the ways that they interact in community to try to lift up both grace and things that are hard helps them to move forward into the world. Maybe as a result of this conversation, you'll think, wow, there might be some poetry I want to go pick up. Maybe you'll decide you want to write more. Maybe you'll decide you want to collectively be a part of community poetry making, which is something I learned about through this conversation. Or maybe it'll just help you feel better to listen to someone who has so much ability to have joy and hope into the future, regardless of how things have gone in their life.
My name is Aileen Cassinetto. I'm the poet laureate of the County of San Mateo in Northern California, San Francisco Bay Area. I'm an immigrant poet and a community poet, which means that I write about my diaspora, about my community, my history, and issues of race, gender, and class as I witness them. And the way I approach my writing is also how I approach my work as poet laureate. It means constantly looking at the communities I serve and asking who is being left behind and how can I make poetry more accessible for them.
Would you be willing to share a little more about your personal migrant journey?
Well, I grew up in the Philippines during martial law. This was when the Philippines is it's a very complex place. We've been colonized by Spain for 300 years and then the US for another 50 years. So there's a lot of thing to decolonize. And after that, martial law came. We were under on dictatorship for 2 decades. And it's probably why my writings are rooted in historical and socio-political context, because that's what I know. And like I said, it doesn't always show it, but whenever a poet writes a poem, it's there, all the sum total of a poet's journey. And then I'm also a product of chain migration. So I joined my parents in 2000, and being an immigrant is really hard, economically, mentally, emotionally. And then I find myself looking for safe, sacred spaces. I find that people fear what they don't know. Mm. And I've in the last 2 years, Asian groups have been working really hard to push back and also worked with other, like in Oakland, Asian and Black communities have been working together. And I think what we do is just we look out for each other and call out racism when it happens. I've encountered this in San Francisco in the financial district. I was having coffee one morning and somebody came up and said, "We don't want you here." So those are hurtful experiences. I realized poetry was such an important tool. It was able to amplify the most marginalized voices. And it's really the great equalizer and certainly one of our most democratic forms of artistic expression. It has helped me personally process and understand the world. And I've noticed people, even non poets, turning to poetry as a survival mechanism and a way to heal and reimagine the future. And poetry allows us to write about our vulnerabilities in nonlinear abstract ways. It's like having a shield, like we're given an added layer of protection so that we're not too vulnerable. And personally, also, I've noticed that it was this great community builder. Last year, I curated a community poem for healthcare workers and frontliners, which raised money for the San Mateo County Health Foundation. And because of the poem's theme and unified voice, it found its way to different venues around the country, like in Connecticut for Memorial Day, and the Alzheimer's Poetry Project in Minnesota, and the Montgomery Independent School District in Texas. It was an example of how a poem can live a life beyond what the poets have envisioned.
I'm curious when you talk about like curating a group poem, what does that process look like?
So I send out mass emails and just post on Nextdoor and other social media. I give a prompt and I just ask them if they had a message for healthcare workers, frontliners, or anybody in their family who's working in the front lines to send them to me. And then I uh, collated the all the messages and then work them into a more unified structure so that it read more like a poem with the line breaks and the musicality that people look for in a poem. So it's at the end, we had this very long poem that kind of, it sounded like it's one person speaking, but it's really many different people. It's like having this large kitchen table where everyone can has a voice. Everyone has has a, a, a say in the matter, and everyone contributes.
There's been times, maybe pockets of time, where the grief and the trauma of it all has been a lot. And so there are times when I think people feel very creative and inspired, and then other times where people just want to hide under their blankets. Do you have anything that you do to try to help your creativity blossom or to find ways to make inspiration happen?
Yes. So this a poet I admire, Mary Refill, has said that the struggle of writing requires patience and faith, and this is especially true for me. I find that when I'm going through periods of creative burnout or unrest, sometimes the best way for me to deal with them is to just take a break and do something else. Taking a walk or ironing or reading a good mystery novel to relax the mind. Or if I have a deadline, I try to read different magazines, not necessarily about poetry. I read a lot of National Geographic, Nature, Journal, or Reader's Digest, and almost always a word or a line or an idea catches my attention, which I then incorporate into the poem. I've seen how inspiration can come from the most mundane activity or the most ordinary object. And I'm not going to lie, writing doesn't come easy for me. I wrestle with every line. I read lots of material just to find that one perfect word. And this is also where faith comes in for me. I just trust that an idea is on its way and soon the poem will reveal itself. I think what poetry does is that it teaches us to pause, to look beyond the surface of things, at what connects us with the world and with each other. It's this intersectional space that that we have the poetic license to look at human ecology, earth systems, ecosystems, and human relationships that invites people. It can be disarming and it invites introspection. And hopefully, we want conversations to happen. I think poetry resonates because we each carry within us, in equal measure, a world of trauma and boundless grace, which is why a poem is born of both ferocity and gentleness, which each of us encounters directly or indirectly in our daily life. So a poem, even if it's a hard poem to read, it speaks to us because it is our shared humanity in a nutshell. Just getting people to listen, to pause and listen, and hopefully invite conversation, find connections. That can be a very healing environment.
I'm gonna just sit and marinate for a while on this idea that there is equal measure trauma and boundless grace. Like that for me is a wonderful way of looking at some of the ways that our world is happening right now.
But actually, every poem I write, it has heartache and violence, but I always want to temper it with love and hope. I think if I may share a poem that I wrote, this poem was a statement on immigration and movement and gender, but I also wanted it to be a poem of love and redemption, and I'd like to share it with you. Still, like air, we rise toward the light, our movement widening as though in prayer, holy and urgent. I will say your name, an act of love more powerful than the weight of air or the falling of light, like clouds speaking their truth, every heap and layer, every curl of hair a reckoning. Still, I pray for grace to hear your story and what you know of clouds, why they shine at night, where they touch the ground, how they birth a star. Perhaps you will want to know my story and why these queries. What will it cost to cross an inch of scorn or climb a wall of fear? How much to plow the air to read the clouds? How much for a sip of water, a gulp of air? How much for 3 square feet of space, for the narrowest breathing place? How much for the life of my child? Still I ask, an act of grace as I rise toward the light. And that's the poem.
I like that. Are there ways that folk can connect with you if they want to learn more about what you're up to in San Mateo County and in the world in general?
Yes, they can always email me, SMC Poet Laureate, that's one word, at smcl.org, or through my Facebook page or Instagram and Twitter at SM County PL.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and even if it wasn't your cup of tea, all shall be well anyway. You can support this podcast by liking and subscribing or following or leaving a good review. If you didn't enjoy it, the way I guess you can support us is maybe don't leave a review. But thank you for listening. Thank you for those who are providing support on Patreon and who are lifting up this podcast and sharing with others. I really appreciate y'all and all the love that you have sent back and the support that you have shared for this journey. Thanks, y'all.